Alrighty, I'm back with another one. Good to see you again. Today, I want to talk about why entrepreneurs mostly stay broke. Now, the word entrepreneur, I don't really like using that word too much, but I remember starting out, it was something that made me feel good about myself. I remember it was very ego driven. It was kind of cool because registering a business, you would open up your own special bank account and you'd get, your own special lane at the bank, which was specifically at my bank. I don't know about you guys, but there was a lot of sort of on the pedestal type feelings. And the thing is, there's all these articles out there saying that 90% of startups fail. And going through a few businesses, like I started out with, t-shirts. I wanted to do sunglasses. There was music, photography, and all different, niches within photography. I did a lot. There was also YouTube back then. I had a talk show. There was a lot going on, and I sort of dabbled into a lot of different contrasting areas of business. And essentially, most of them, if not all of them, pretty much failed. Failed in the sense of not being substantial enough to actually have a stable income, to actually live life. It was more so, what can I do with the freedom that my parents are giving me with this safety net of, having a roof over my head, so to speak, and literally nothing more than that. Maybe they bought me a camera, and that's about it. But everything else was covered, like internet, food, water, electricity, everything was covered. Outside of that, like the general living costs, I was pretty much free to do whatever I wanted to do. So naturally, we back then explored a lot of different avenues, and it wasn't sort of anchored on, the dependency of actually having to make real money and surviving. It was more so having the freedom to do whatever I need to do, which was a luxury. And still to this very day, it is a luxury. I have met a lot of people throughout my lifetime where they don't have this type of support. For the ones that do, just please be aware. Like, I get that every day. You're having it anyway, maybe for people in this circumstance, but understand that this is not for everyone. There are a lot of people who may be very driven in the sense of actually getting work done, who are actually very fit to actually run a business, but the problem is, cash flow and just living expenses forces them into employment where it's more of the safety sort of route, right? So again, what I want to talk about today is why most startups stay broke, most entrepreneurs, right, stay broke. And looking back now, if I were to, I guess, put it in a nutshell, it would revolve around a lot of things, but I would say the top sort of elements or the top sort of things that I would revolve it around would be personal development and systems, right? Personal development, it covers a lot of things, right? Obviously makes you a better person as is to navigate a lot of the peaks and troughs of the journey of business. Systems in the sense of like looking at it at a whole sort of entire spectrum, it would be, I guess, organizing everything, forecasting everything, making sure that things that need to be done are done, and making sure that the cycle of business travels through correctly and reiterates correctly. So that's the general gist, and the rest of today's message will be to explore that. So where I want to start first, I guess let's track backwards from where I am today to where I was in the very beginning, right? So today, look, my bread and butter is developing systems for, larger enterprise businesses. Used to be small businesses, not anymore. Basically, what I do is essentially deep dive into their operations and, work out, a mental workflow or literal workflow, like a blueprint, and then understand every task that is involved within the entire operations process, mapping it all out, and then creating systems around it. So let's say, your average mechanic or let's say a cafe owner or whatever it is, most of the times they're doing things based off what they know, like what they've thought up of. Maybe they've got things written down on paper. I essentially digitize those systems, or I improve it through digital systems. Now, granted, I'm not working with these small businesses anymore. Now I'm with the larger companies, and I'm essentially taking what they already have and just putting it on steroids, pretty much. So outside of systems, what I also do is develop automations and develop systems to pretty much automate processes, right? I'm not going to dive too deep into that, but what would I say that I'm an expert in now that is missing from me back then would be the systems. So not even going to travel into automations, just the very core basics, right? Also for everyone else out there who might be in the same situation. Just the core basics of just understanding what the actual entire operation is, right? We've already talked about focus in the past episodes, and that was already an issue in itself, but I'm just going to pretend that I did choose one thing and I did focus on one thing. Now, the thing is, there is a huge issue with focus as it is already, but if systems were in place, naturally that will create accountability, right? Because everything will be laid out. And again, if there is systems in place, then every step will be detailed. Everything will be listed that needs to be done. Or if it's in order, then it needs to be done in a specific order, or whatever it is, right? There's a system method called Kanban, which is essentially everything listed out left to right, top to bottom, whatever you want. And essentially you just travel through like an assembly line. Now, that would have been great back then for just a fundamental basic system for me to manage what I was doing back then, right? One of the many business ideas I had back then. I think that in itself, essentially what it does is it allows me to start creating data, right? It starts to accumulate information about my operations. And then that would allow me to forecast a lot of things. So say, for example, the time it takes to complete work, or the costs it took per job and what I'm actually generating out of it, revenue over profit, against profit, right? It will allow me to look at things like the ability to hire people, right? If I'm making X amount from this job, if I were to hire this person at X rate, then what would return into the business or the company, right? Is it feasible, right? So it'll open doors for scaling, right? Other pieces of information could be, into marketing, say, for example, like cost per lead, like how much did it actually cost me to actually generate this lead, nurture them, and then convert them to a sale. There's so many things that pop up naturally once you start to accumulate data within your system. So what I'm trying to get at is operating blind is sort of like driving a car, but with no dash, right? So you're solely relying on the speed of other cars, right? Or you're sort of guessing the speed limit, like you're just driving based off emotion. You might know where you want to go, but you don't know necessarily if you're following the road rules, so to speak, right? You might be going too slow, or you might be going too fast. Too slow, you're not getting there efficiently. Too fast, you might get stopped by the cops, and you get a fine, not a literal analogy, but in essence, if you were to try to drive your car without the dash, without the speedo, without the tachometer, whatever it is, it's kind of hard. Even without the fuel gauge, right? To keep it even more simple, without the fuel gauge, how long can you actually drive for, right? How do you actually know? Right. Well, these days with EVs, your battery charge. Driving with these instruments obviously makes things clearer. You know how fast you're going. You know how much fuel or how much charge you have. You get sensors or warnings for like low tire pressure, like your engine oil. Like there's all these things that pop up, that actually help you diagnose the situation. And even if you're not, savvy with cars, you will get a warning, and that warning will prompt you to go to your local mechanic or whatever it is and get them to check it out, right? In essence, if we were to apply that analogy into business, it would be running your business with, these tools to help you understand where the business is at, to help you diagnose what current or maybe future problems there is, right? Because operating blindly, chances are you are operating based off emotion. And if you don't have concrete data to actually forecast how much you're making or how much you're expecting to make or whatever it is, you're sort of just running along freely with emotion. And that is okay because it's a wonderful feeling, don't get me wrong, but it's not okay in the sense of you trying to control your life. So controlling your life in the sense of also controlling the business, right? Because chances are the person that I'm trying to speak to, is a solo operator, and the person I'm, I guess pushing this message towards is the past me who was in that startup, right? And again, why do startups fail 90% of the time? It's because they're lacking these instruments, right? They're driving without any information, and it causes a lot of issues, right? Say, for example, if you have low tire pressure, your fuel efficiency goes off, or, imagine maybe you pop a tire and, you just start to go crazy on the road, right? The same thing in business. If you knew your tire pressure was going low because maybe you popped the tire, then you could react to it. But if you don't react to it, by the time, it goes to shit and everything just gets messy, it's already too late. Not too late, but you have to adapt and then fix the problem because it becomes a high priority, like it becomes super urgent, right? Whereas you could have sort of avoided that a long time ago by just having those checks, right? Systems is where it comes into place. So the different thing about driving a car and running your own business is that essentially you get to create your own car, so to speak. So systems, you get to create your own systems. Most people are not fortunate like me where I can create my own system. Chances are you would probably sign up with a platform that already has, the general stuff already made out for you, like things like Trello, Asana, Monday, right? Where you can project manage your entire business based on, some of the templates that they've got ready to go for you. So if I were to go back in time and then say, hey, sign up to this platform, pay this every month, I promise you'll make more money because you'll be more organized. You will, get your shit together. The system will literally keep you accountable because you'll be, you have all the right logic and the right thoughts on how everything needs to be done. It's just there's so many things running on your mind that you probably won't remember. Well, specifically for me, worst memory. Me without technology, I'm rubbish, absolutely rubbish. But to have everything within the systems, right, it helps create a better process, a better flow, right? Say, for example, like right now I'm using Monday and I develop a lot of systems for clients on Monday, and for the long-term clients, we can literally track back 2, 3, 4, 5 years in an instant and know what happened on that day, right? So that's just invaluable information. And the reason why businesses fails, or this is one of the reasons. If you don't have these systems, how can you expect to actually manage your business? Every day that goes by with your business is another day full of information that you need to capture. Without a system, how are you capturing these things? Yeah, it may be cool. You can write it down in a diary, or write it down on one of your books or whatever it is, right? But that's inefficient in the sense of it's old school technology where you have to open it up, look at it, read it, blah blah blah, make all your decisions. Not saying that it doesn't work. It will work, but we're in the modern age where we're glued to our phones, right? You can literally pull out your phone in 2 seconds and then pop open one of your systems, right? This is the state that we're in today, okay? And even back then, when I was 21, it was available. There were systems back then. I just didn't know, right? Lack of mentorship, lack of awareness, lack of everything. It was just more so, I'm a business owner, let's go do business things, right? Because that's cool and all at 21, whatever, right? So how would it actually help me to succeed? Well, again, with all the data involved, you can actually forecast. And say, for example, if you forecast into the future where you can project revenues, you can project profits, you can project all of these different things, you can actually understand if what you're currently doing now is even worth it for the future. So say, for example, if you can look at your current, expenses versus how much you make, right? You can map that out for 12 years. And then you can see literally how much you're expected to make in December if you're measuring from January, right? So that will give you clarity in the sense where you can understand what's going to happen throughout the year. And then from there, you can make a decision on, pivoting if you need to step it up a few notches, or you're good where you're at, or maybe you can kick it down a couple notches because it's just too extreme, right? Whatever it is. So this essentially will give you a gauge on literally the potential of your success. So to combat that 90% and make it into that 10% bracket, right? Obviously, success is very subjective. Everyone has different goals, but having this fundamental, practice in place will already give you a real life figure for you to weigh against your depiction of success. So if you're looking to make $100,000, if you're looking to make $50,000, whatever it is, right? You can utilize these systems to actually project where you can be at month 12 within the first year. And that will help you achieve that success rate, or get into that success spot, that 10%, right? Again, success is subjective. So the thing is, what's important is that you actually set your goal and actually make it. So what are some other things, that we can do, or I can tell you to get into that 10%? Well, the other side was personal development, right? So you could have the blueprints to success. Right? I could give you the blueprints to success. Based on my experience, me 10, 12, 15 years in the future, giving it back to you at the state of 21. Right? I literally can give you that. The major issue is if you don't have the correct sort of accumulation of all the different skills and all different facets of personal development, right? All the things that come within the subject of personal development. If you don't have all of the things that is taught within this category, not all, but most, then you might not be able to execute this blueprint, right? The last episode, we talked about navigating emotions, right? Dealing with clients that, kick back in the sense of they have a complaint, right? Back then, when it would get a little bit sour, it would get a lot sour, right? Internally, for me, for you, for us. And growing into business over the last 10, 12, 15 years, not that old, I've developed this skill to actually identify the fires and then learn how to put out the fires, create a solution, and then move on, right? It's not as bad as it feels, when you first are introduced to these scenarios, because back then when there would be a fire, it would be a mixture of negative emotions, whether it be panic, whether it would be, just being upset or whatever it is, right? Back then when the fire would burn, I would leave it burning, and that would cause issues because it would burn the bridge essentially, right? And then just cut the client altogether. But the reason being behind that was because I was thinking, that's okay, I can find another client, that's absolutely fine. But that doesn't help with the paycheck to paycheck cycle, right? And this all falls into that 90% failure rate, because the amount of fires that were popping up, I wasn't able to put them out. So I would find another place to build a nest, so to speak, right? And that whole cycle wasn't quick enough to actually get into that 10% of success. So learning how to put out fires actually saves that nest. And at the same time, you can build another nest, right, so to speak. When I say nest, I'm talking about clients, right? So learning how to work with a client that actually is worthwhile, right? And learning how to satisfy them, keeping them is probably a lot easier than finding another client. Unless you're good at marketing, different story. But if you're not good at marketing, which is what most startups don't have in terms of a skill set, then chances are you're better off sort of learning how to develop your personality, right? Develop yourself as a person to better navigate, these ugly waters, right? So retaining clients in the sense of making sure that, they're tip top in the best shape, and they love what you do. So what's next? Well, more about personal development, right? There's also grit, right? And putting in the work, there's grind, there's only so much you can do. Really, there is only so much you can do. There's only so much time within the day. I remember one of the things I used to say was, man, I wish there was more days in the week, right? I would think of these things where it's like, I wish there was more time in a day. I wish there was 50 hours in a day. I wish there was 10 days in the weekday and then the weekends, right? That doesn't really matter in the end, because it all sort of ends up being the same thing anyway, right? The real issue was I wasn't able to commit time and stay focused on a job. And funnily enough, even to this day, I'm still sort of the same person, but I've understood who I am as a person for the longest time, and I know how to work around my weaknesses, right? There are people, other business owners that I talk to, and I'm quite envious of them. Not envious in the terms of I want that, but envious in the terms of I love that you're that person. It would be cool if I was too, but I'm not. And I've made my own, practices and methods to actually complement my situation. So I know how to work around my own faults. So I don't necessarily need, that trait, that personality trait that this person might have, where they can knock out 8 to 10 to 12 hour days, no sweat. Whereas I can only do, 4 to 6, so to speak, right? So you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be the perfect specimen in terms of ticking every box, but you need to know who you are, what your limitations are. Can you actually overcome these limitations? Or have you tried so many times that you understand that this is just who you are, right? And if you fall into that sort of category, then you need to understand, how do I navigate around this? How do I make my weakness become a strength? Or how do I build support around my weakness to nullify it, right? So it's not a problem, right? So personal development, it's quite vast in terms of, how many different lessons there are in it, how many different topics there are, how many different, experiences that you'll have within it. And I feel like it's not something, well, for me personally, it's not something that you just go out and you take a class and you learn. Probably there is. But I feel like it's a very personal experience in terms of doing a lot of self-reflection and understanding what the hell just happened with this client, like how did it go from awesome to shit in a matter of months, right? And the reason why it's so important, because if you become really good at personal development, naturally you'll be able to retain clients a lot better, right? And it's not an impossible skill. It's definitely something you can learn, and everyone, again, has their own personal journey within this, but then they become the better version of who they are, more and more so every day. And naturally, if you progress in this domain, then naturally you become better with the clients that you click with, right? And if you become better with the clients that you click with, chances are you can retain them a lot easier. Now, we spoke about retainers before. I think these days it depends on the level that you're operating within. I think enterprise companies have a lot of retainer deals. It's just expected. But small to medium size businesses or companies, it's quite unsexy in a way. I think it all depends on your sales process. It depends on your industry. But, it's not a necessity in terms of you have to get a retainer and retain them for, 6, 12, 24 months, right, in order to actually grow and sustain your business. No, it's not the only case. You can, have literal relationships with clients where it's like monthly payments, that can vary depending on how much they need to hire you, so to speak. And if you have really strong relationships, they ultimately technically do, or emotionally do, become retainers in a sense, because you need to create an environment where you become an asset to their team, right? Your services or your product becomes an asset to that team. Something that is irreplaceable would be ideal. Again, in the first episode, we spoke about it's not just the product or service, it's also you yourself, right? Or your business itself, right? The experience as a whole is what the service or product is, right? So you could have literally the same service and the same product as your competitor, but the kicker or the difference could be the way that you deliver it, or who you are as a person, or there's so many different emotional factors that come into it, right? And you got to remember that, well, I haven't actually told you this, so I'll tell you now, every sale is emotional, right? No matter what you buy, it's emotional, okay? You really got to think about that one. And once you come to fruition and you actually understand what I mean by that, right? Let's just go over this for a couple of minutes, right? Every sale is emotional. Everything that you buy, whether it is a subscription, whether it is a product, whether it's a service, whatever it is, it has a level of emotion attached to it, right? There is a logical side to the process, but it's predominantly revolving around an emotional side, right? Like, do me a favor and just think about the last maybe 3 things that you bought, and then think about the emotion behind it,